Hello, this is Lara from Create Access. In this video, we will learn about how to animate assets and cameras in UEFN. Animating assets will add extra layer of interest and interactivity to your island. Animating cameras will help you create cinematic cutscenes. Cutscenes are short, animated sequences that players can watch while the gameplay is paused. These skills can help you elevate your island by adding extra interest in moving objects and animated cutscenes. To create cinematics or moving objects in UEFN, you need to create a timeline asset called Sequence. Go to your project folder in Content Drawer, create a new folder named Sequences. Right-click an empty area in this folder. Select Cinematics, Level Sequence. A new sequence will be created in your Content Drawer and you can name it as you wish. By double-clicking on your sequence, open the sequencer. This is a new editor window where you can see the timeline of your sequences that you created. The green and red lines in the sequencer indicate the start and end of your animations. You can click and drag on these indicators to change the start and end of your timeline. The white line with the red marker is the time indicator. This shows which frame or second you are at on your timeline. You can use this indicator to scrub through your animations. By default, the sequencer in UEFN is set to frames per second, specifically 30 FPS. This means every 30 frame in the sequencer is equal to 1 second of animation. You can change the setting by clicking on the 30 FPS dropdown, selecting Show Time as Seconds. Your timeline will now indicate seconds instead of frames. Pick an object from your island that you would like to animate. You can add this object to the sequencer by drag and drop, or you can click on the Add button on the left side of the sequencer and select Actor to Sequencer. In this dropdown, find and select the object you want to animate. To be able to animate the movement of any object, we need to use a transform track. Add this track to your sequencer by clicking on the small plus icon next to your object's name and select Transform. Now it's time to animate. Make sure the time indicator is set to the beginning of your timeline. In the viewport, place and scale your object exactly to the position you want it to be at the beginning of your animation. Click on the small plus within a diamond icon on the transform track called Key to lock in the transform properties of your object. Keying means that at this exact second of your sequence, the object will be at the location, rotation, and scale that it was when you pressed the key button. Now move the time indicator to the end of your timeline. Move the object in the viewport to a new location. You can also scale or rotate it. To lock in or key this new state of your object, press the same plus icon on the transform track. There will be 2 pink circles on your timeline to indicate that you've added 2 animation keys to your object. So far, we've created 2 keys in our sequence that represent the start and end position of our object. When you play your animation, the object will travel the shortest distance between the 2 locations you've set when keying your animation. You can also see this distance by the thin blue line in your viewport. Scrub through your timeline with the time indicator, or use the play button on the bottom left of the sequencer to play your animation and see it in real time. You can keep moving your object to new positions and add more keys to create a more dynamic animation. By default, the timeline in sequencer is set to 5 seconds. If you'd like to extend your timeline so you can add more animation keys to your asset, you can do so by going to the numerical slot on the right side of the playback buttons. Type in the number of seconds you would like to go to and press enter. Your timeline indicator will move to the second that you enter to the slot. To extend the end of your animation further than 5 seconds, you can click and drag on the red square bracket, or you can use the red square bracket icon next to the playback buttons. Now that you extended your timeline, you can keep moving your asset in the viewport, and you can add more keys to have a longer animation sequence. The The cinematic sequencer device is needed to play your animations in UEFN when you're in game mode. Search for this device in the content drawer and add it to your island. Select the cinematic sequencer device on your island and head to the details panel. Use the sequence drop-down and select the sequence you created earlier. You can check the loop playback setting if you want your animation to play non-stop in the game instead of playing just once. Make sure to check the autoplay setting so your animation starts on its own when the game is opened. If you don't want to turn on autoplay, you can add triggers to the cinematic sequencer device and have the animation start based on a trigger. Launch session and start game to see your animation play on your island in Fortnite. Animating a camera is necessary and useful when you want to create cutscenes in your game. The camera you animate will determine the angle and position of the cutscene, rather than the camera following the player. Cutscenes can be useful to tell a story, bring attention to a certain location on your island, or show a zoomed-out views of the environment. The same methods used to animate an object in Sequencer can be used to animate cinematic cameras in UEFN. You can create a camera and automatically add it to your sequence by clicking on the camera icon on the top bar of the sequencer. The look of the viewport will change to indicate that you're now looking at your island from this camera's point of view. Move your time indicator to the beginning of the timeline. Position your camera to the desired angle by navigating in the viewport as usual. When done, click on the plus icon next to the transform bar under the camera to key the position of your camera. Repeat the same process to key a new position for the camera at the end of the timeline. Many properties of the camera can also be animated in the sequencer. Head to the beginning of your timeline and click on the plus icon next to the focal length setting of the camera. Move to the end of your timeline and change the focal length option to zoom your camera in or out. When you're done, click the plus icon again to key the new change in focal length. When you play your sequence with the play button, the camera will move and zoom at the same time. Right now, the camera starts moving and zooming out at the same time. If you'd like to change your animation so the camera starts moving and then zooming out, you can click and drag on the starting key of your focal length and then click and drag it to the second where you want your zoom out to start. Now the camera will start moving and then it'll start zooming out. Similarly, you can click and drag over the keys you do not want anymore in your animation and press delete to delete them altogether. If you want your animated camera to follow an object during the cutscene, you can do so with the look at tracking in the camera settings. Select your camera asset from the sequencer and head to the details panel. Extend the settings for look at tracking. Enable this setting by clicking on the checkbox, and from the drop-down, select the object you want your camera to follow. Now, you should have a camera that is moving between two locations, changing zoom, and looking at a certain object during your cutscene. When you're done animating your camera, you can exit the camera viewport by clicking on the eject button on the top left corner of the viewport. You will be brought back to the editor camera, which is not used for animations in Sequencer. If you ever want to open the camera view again, click on the camera icon next to the desired camera in the sequencer. Now that we set up a cutscene animation, we have to let UEFN know when to play it. The cinematic sequence device can also be used to trigger cinematic cuts in your game. Add a capture area or a similar triggered device to your island from the content drawer. Open the details panel for the cinematic sequence device. When creating cinematics, instead of just object animations, make sure to turn off the loop and autoplay settings. Scroll down to the user options, function settings, and click on the plus icon next to the play option. In the first drop-down, select the capture area device added to your island. For the second drop-down, select On Playing Entering Zone. This way, the cinematic cut will be triggered when the player enters the zone within this device. Launch session and start game to test your animation. Setting up animations in UEFN can be a bit of a trial and error when doing for the first time, but the possibilities are endless when you get the concept of animation down. You can do hundreds of custom animations and many cinematic cutscenes to add your own flavor to your island. These animations can enhance the player's gameplay and help you tell a story. Have fun creating, and thanks for watching.